Hey everybody, my name is Danielle Wheeler and welcome back to my YouTube channel, Willing Toward Success. So today we're at the Attic Youth Center in Philadelphia. So if you hear noise in the background, please excuse us. We're out and about, we can't control the environment. But I am so excited about the topic LGBTQ. Sorry about that, I'm just really excited right now. And I have our educator here, Hazel Edwards, who are going to break it down. So I have a few questions, but she's going to educate me because I'm not, she's correct, right? Yeah. Because I'm not educated on this topic, so I brought in an educator.
So my name's Hazel Edwards. I use she, her, and hers pronouns. Sometimes I'll also make the joke of she, her, and hers chips. Or I would show up and say her, she, kisses, and I apologize if you use he, him, and his and they, them, and theirs pronouns because I spent a lot of time with my pronouns, and so I came up with a lot of pronoun puns. So I am the Educator and Outreach Specialist here at the Attic Youth Center, which is located at 255 South 16th Street, so really at the heart of Center City. So what I do, right, as part of the, LGBTQ Youth Center, I am the Educator and Outreach Specialist of the Bryson Institute of the Attic Youth Center. So the Bryson Institute is actually one of our very first funders, who originally this department was a speakers bureau where LGBTQ youth of color would be able to talk about their experience being LGBTQ within systems that impact them the most. And then over time, it developed into a full-fledged training department. So currently what I do is I both coordinate the trainings at different youth service agencies. So I've talked at faith-based organizations, I've talked at universities, schools, juvenile detention centers, child welfare centers, and really begin to have that conversation around supporting LGBTQ youth of color, supporting the LGBTQ community, as well as gender, sexuality, intersectionality 101s, and best practices while working with LGBTQ youth.
Did you get all of that? Because I did. So Hazel here gave me this lovely packet, which I appreciate, thank you, to educate me on things that I don't know that I thought I did. So you guys should really check it out when you get a chance by contacting Ms. Hazel here. So my first question that I asked her, of course, before the camera start rolling, was the pronouns, because I just learned about Z, right? Mm-hmm. I'm saying it right, Z. And I wasn't sure as to how to use it. So she broke it down to me. So if this is new to any of you, I'm going to give her the opportunity to explain the pronouns because I was a bit confused at first too.
Yeah, so when you first meet somebody, right, within the first 3 to 5 seconds of meeting them, we're beginning to read that individual's gender, right? And so that's based off of how our hair is styled, right? The clothing department that we decide to shop in, our mannerisms. There's even research that talks about, women folks reflect at the end of our our sentences or our questions, right? But I actually think that that's a coping mechanism for oppression because misogyny is real. But and so within those first 3 to 5 seconds of meeting someone, we're even using our own internal biases, right? We're using our own internal bias in the pronouns that we're using to refer to somebody. So if I was to look at you, right, I would see a woman person, right, or a feminine person and say, oh, so they must identify as a woman. And so I might use she, her, and hers pronouns. But what if you expressed in the world just as you are, right? But nobody ever checked in and say, well, what are your pronouns, right? And so by asking somebody their pronouns, it gives them the space to talk about themselves before we use our own biases, right? Before we start to, create or write their journey for them. So yeah, that's important, right? And so that's why pronouns are important. A lot of folks say pronouns aren't important, right? I just see you as you are. I just see you as you are, right? But then when you walk away from this conversation, right, a pronoun's gonna show up. right? A lot of times folks say, I'm gonna just use your name, right? But knowing the way that the English language shows up, right, you're going to use a pronoun. And so if you don't check in and ask a person their pronouns, we might do this thing called misgendering, right? And so, you know, again, check in with those folks. And let them talk about themselves, right? And give them the space, right? Let them show us how to treat them. And pronouns also isn't around our own comfortability, right? It's around, you know, holding respect for other folks and their own identities and the way that they see themselves.
So I was curious about this handout that I received, and Ms. Hazel here is going to break it down for me. It's so cool. I'm a visual learner, but it's some things I thought I knew, but I didn't. So I'm going to let her break it down for us.
And so this tool that we are looking at is called the Gender Unicorn, and you can find the Gender Unicorn at Trans Student Educational Resources. And so a lot of time, so it breaks down gender and sexuality and the different parts that live inside of gender and sexuality. But one of the takeaways, right, is that gender and sexuality are two different parts of ourselves, right? Gender is our innermost concept of self, right? How we see ourselves navigating throughout the world, how we see ourselves, the spirits that we're feeling, right? And sexuality is who we're attracted to, right? And a lot of times we use gender to name sexuality. For example, a boy who likes boys, a boy who likes girls. But we have to understand, right, that gender and sexuality are two distinct parts of ourselves. And so sometimes folks may see the tool, the genderbread person, but actually the genderbread person was created by trans women of color that were in college, and they created this tool to talk about those different parts, right? But then, right, a white cisgender identified man, right, and real quick for language, I want to break down cisgender. So it is CIS, which means same side as in Latin. So it's when your gender identity and assigned sex are the same. Conversely, you're transgender. And the reason why we have this language is so that when we're talking about trans justice, trans liberation, and trans people, it restrains us from saying trans people and normal people, right? Trans women and real women. When you're either a cisgender individual or a transgender individual, both are real, both are normal, right? And so the cisgender, right, man who was white, who had intergenerational wealth, right, he took this tool, put it on his website. He had access to fancy graphics. And so actually doesn't even name the people that he co-opted this tool from, right, and stole this tool from. And so we're actually shifting to the Gender Unicorn. Not only does it show on the Gender Unicorn the spectrum, but it also names the trans folks of color that created the tool. So it gives credit to them. And so I highly prefer, you know, to use this tool to break down in more simpler terms a couple of concepts that live in both gender and sexuality. So you want to turn it around so I can, you know, start pointing at things?
Oh yes,
yes.
I'm excited.
So I first want to take a moment to look at the sex assigned at birth. And so the reason why we have assigned at birth and not biological sex is because our biological sex encompasses multiple things. It encompasses our hormones, our chromosomes, secondary sex characteristics, internal and external reproductive organs. Yet, when an infant is born, we don't look at their medical biology, right? We don't look at their biological sex. We look at one piece of that biological sex puzzle, which is external reproductive organs, which is genitals, right? And so we have to talk about sex assigned at birth because it's a literal assignment based off of your genitals, right? It's something that was given to you and may not inherently be a thing that you occupy, right? And so when we're talking about sex assigned at birth, or when we're actually looking at biological sex, we start to see intersex folks show up. And so we have male, female, and intersex, right? And so intersex definition simply means, right, those 5 biological factors that I just listed fall outside of medical standards of what's considered to be male and what's considered to be female. And so a lot of times, or historically, a lot of folks only saw intersex folks as being or as holding both genitalia, right? Both a fully formed vagina and a fully formed penis. When a lot more frequently, it looks like the 3 millimeter difference of what a doctor considers to be a large clitoris or a small penis when an infant is born. So literally, a margarine, right, of 3 millimeters determines whether you have an M or an F on your birth certificate, right?
We knew that, yes.
But there are actually 33 different intersex conditions, and there's 33, 34, right, intersex conditions that live on that spectrum within those 5 different pieces. And so intersex conditions are as frequent as every 1 in 2,000 to every 1 in 1,500 births. Yep. Wow. And so prior to the 90s, though, doctors would do this thing called corrective surgery, right? So they would medically transition the child into having a vagina if they had ambiguous genitalia, because simply that's what's easier for doctors to make. And so BuzzFeed has this video called Being Intersex, which talks about different intersex folks' experiences, and this one intersex man stood out to me. He talked about having testes that was removed at birth, raised as a little girl, right? Got a little older, said, I don't feel like a girl, I feel like a man, right? Started going into his own medical history and found out he had testes that was removed at birth, and now he cannot have biological children. And again, I don't want to say that all intersex folks are trans or vice versa, but I do want to note that transgender is an adjective, right? That simply means that you do not identify or solely identify with the sex given to them at birth. But a lot of intersex folks, right, push back and say, actually, if our assigned sex is wrong, because it's a lot more complex than society makes us feel like it is, then are we actually trans people, right? And so, yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, so that was a little bit about biological sex, right? And so some intersex folks may go through puberty and begin to develop in a way that they don't, that they don't expect based off of their assigned sex. So a person assigned female at birth may go through puberty and begin to develop facial hair and not breast tissue, right? Or a person assigned male at birth may begin to have a higher voice, right? And not begin to develop facial hair or body hair. Because those are secondary sex characteristics based in our hormones. Some intersex folks may go and try to have a child and find out that they don't have all of the internal reproductive organs that they thought or expected based off of their assigned sex. And many folks don't get their chromosomes tested, right? And so that's another way that folks may know that they're intersex. So that is, right, that's just basically showing how complex and how we all on a biological spectrum all show up differently, right? On a biological sex, on the basis of biological sex, we all show up differently. And so, yeah, so that's like the more sciencey part. And so now I want to bring it to the more social, societal part, right? And so I want to bring it up to gender identity. And so gender identity up at the top is our innermost concept of self, right? If I close my eyes and think about my gender, do I see myself as a masculine person? Do I see myself as a man, right? Or do I see myself not identifying within the gender binary, right? Do I not feel, you know, I don't believe in the inherent oppressive gender norms or expectations of women or men, and so I may say F gender, right, and not identify with gender because of those toxic reinforcements that oppress people. Do I close my eyes and think about my gender as being a woman, right? And so, yeah, so gender identity is our innermost concept of self. And I also love this tool because it shows up that you can both occupy manhood, right, as well as femininity, as well as any or other genders out in the world, right, that are both living inside or outside of that gender binary. And again, right, when I'm using this language, binary meaning two, so meaning man and woman pertaining to gender identity.